Just to let you know in advance, I don't have an answer to that question. I'd be gladly eager to have your input and your answer, but it's certainly very controversial. As technologies of artificial reproduction technologies have improved in terms of egg donation, gonadotropin, success rate has improved. Pregnancy has become a possibility for women after menopause or after they biologically can have a child. So I'm going to touch a bit to that subject. It's always been very curious how throughout the Bible, throughout medical and the lay journal, even that was an article that came out in the 1700s about this woman who married at the age of 94, and they lived several years together, and she had a child at 105 years old, and a few children after 100 years old. You have to take this article with a grain of salt to see if it's true or right, or maybe she was truly exceptional. Now, let's talk about a few scenarios which are real, really. You have a 51-year-old CEO, very successful. She had no children by choice. She felt her life was fulfilled with a career, but she recently decided to work part-time, and she met this wonderful guy. Let's say he's very healthy, very wealthy, and she married him, and she had the menopause last year. Although she was never too keen to have children, he is, and she convinced him to want children. And another scenario altogether, where you have Mrs. Altruistic, who's married 30 years, has 3 kids, and her daughter unfortunately was born with Rokitansky syndrome, has no uterus, and her daughter gets married recently and asks, "Mom, could you do me a big, big favor?" You can just imagine what the favor is. Can you carry a child for me? So now we also have phenomenon of delayed childbearing. Women have career goals, financial possibility, marital stability. Sometimes you have new relationships that occur as divorce get more frequent and remarriage. Recently I had a patient who's a grandmother. She's 44 and now is expecting egg-donated twins. She's 44, 46 with a new husband who has no kids. He wanted kids. Well, now she's expecting twins. Women are also older and in better health than before. And we have now, like Dr. Grunbaum said, safer pregnancies and safer deliveries. And there have been definitely advances in perinatal diagnosis. Very delayed childbearing. That brings up many issues. We could talk about it for hours and hours and debate about the ethical aspect behind it, sociological, biological, political, and this slippery slope. I don't want to get too much into that topic. I'm going to strictly, stay on the medical aspect of it. It's very clear that fertility decreases over time. There's no doubt about it. If you look at it in a natural history without ART, the rate of spontaneous pregnancy after 45 is quite rare. A reality that happens also is that women are in the States having kids later and later. And one group that, excuse me, I'm going to try to go back to pointer. I have it here. If you look at the group that has a slightly increased risk rate of pregnancy, is the group between 40 and 44. In many statistics, they don't even look at women after 45 because they give birth so rarely that they're not included. So again, increased birth rate in that age group of 40 to 44-year-old. The median and birth at first birth and median birth increases every year spontaneously. And so much so that in 2000, women giving birth over the age of 35 represented a much, much higher percentage that younger women did, say, 30 years ago. So, I don't want to digress from the topic of menopause, but if you look at women over 35, there's a study that came out recently, fairly recently, looking at these women after 35 and proving that this decreased fertility, increased multiplicity, and that's surprising. Also, an increased incidence of underlying medical conditions such as hypertension, diabetes, more spontaneous abortions, more multifetal pregnancies, pregnancy complications, birth defects, cesareans, anomalies, and so on. But overall, the outcomes are good. I think we'll all agree that after 35 or 36, 37, most of the time you can tell a woman, although your chances of successful outcome are lower than if you are 21 or 23 or 25, overall the chances are good that you have a healthy baby. So when we talk about very delayed childbearing, until recently it was exceptional, it was usually accidental. If we talk before the advance of reproductive technology. And now we deal with groups that are over 50 that have a very desired pregnancy, very planned, with an egg donor. So completely different studies, different animals. And if you look at the studies are, they're very few, retrospective, population-based. No long-term studies are done on the psychosocial implications of giving birth after 50 for women. I mean, it's funny how no one flinches when a father has a child at 70 or 80 or 90, but who knows what the impact is when the mother is 55 and gives birth. What is the impact of this young child, 15, caring for older parents? You also have to keep in mind that the life expectancy of a woman at birth today in the U.S., I believe is in the order of 78 years old. But if you reach the age of 50 or 60 and you're very healthy still, it's not so anymore. It's probably at least 85 to 90 years old of healthy life in front of you. Still controversial, and I'll leave it to the REI people, the effect of birth defects in ART and the effect of ART on cancer and from the reproductive technologies. Jacobson looked at a population from Sweden. It's an observational, again, with all its limitation, population-based study from 87 to 2001, looking at women between the age of 40 to 44, comparing them to women after 45, with a control group between 20 and 29 years old. And they control for hypertension, asthma, lupus, and inflammatory bowel disease. As you can expect, as it was in the States and most countries, you've got an increase in the mean age of first birth in all age group, in these older age group. And they control for parity, for fetal malformation, smoking, maternal illness, and plurality of gestation. And what's concerning is that although these were not products of, very often products of artificial reproductive technology, you got an increase in perinatal mortality, perinatal death, and which is proportional in each group. It increases in each group from 20 to 29, 40 to 44, and more than 45. Increase in preterm birth in that older group compared to the younger groups. Increase in preterm birth before 37, 34, 32 weeks. Increase incidence of SGA and LGA. And so also decrease in the number of normal vaginal delivery. Don't forget they also control for parity. So, the older you are, the more you are likely to get a C-section or a horrible vacuum delivery, Dr. Grunbaum. And what was concerning also, although the numbers are very small, and you can control for much with these numbers, is the number of maternal deaths. There are 21 maternal deaths, and with significantly higher number in the older group, 166 per 100,000. Okay, like Dr. Gunaram said, again, if it doesn't happen to you, it's fine. It's a very small risk. But if it does happen to you, well, you're dead. You can't remember, but it's a very serious consequence. The first study that came out and looked specifically at women that was postmenopausal came out in 2002, so relatively recent. A great program done in California looking at 77 postmenopausal women between the age of 50 and 63. They were all having egg donor, and they were all super screened. I mean, they had to be healthy. First of all, if you wanted to be in that program, you had to be motivated, but not only motivated, you had to be rich. I mean, let's face it, IVF is very, very expensive. Egg donation is very expensive. And they had to be healthy. They had a history in a physical, an EKG, lipid profile, a mammogram, chest X-ray, and psychological evaluation, the whole bit. So they achieved 55 clinical pregnancies and 45 live births, which is not bad, with 3 repeated pregnancies. The rate of nulliparity was 58%. Quite a large number of twins, I think, for that age group. 12 sets of twins, 6 sets of twins, 31 singleton, 2 triplets. Rate of cesarean, not too surprising, 78%. Concerning finding of preeclampsia, very high. If you look at the group over 55, 60%. Under 55, 26%. Gestational diabetes, not so high, 20%. You say normally in our population it could be 5%. Now it's 20%. 1 PPROM at 29 weeks, resulting in delivery with a good outcome at 30 weeks. 1 30-week delivery for severe preeclampsia, which I don't think is too different from, if you look at 77 patients, wouldn't be very different from young population. But don't forget, these are cell-selective, healthy patients with no underlying illnesses. And 1 hysterectomy for placenta accreta. Importantly, there was no maternal mortality and perinatal mortality. Dulesky looked at the effect of very maternal age on the pregnancy outcome and the effect on cesarean delivery. It's a group in Israel. They looked at women more than 44 and compared them to women that were between the age of 20 to 29. The control for parity, for infertility, prior uterine surgery, and chronic medical condition, and didn't find much differences except for an increase in cesarean delivery, 39% in the older group versus 4.2% in the lower group, which appears to be very, very low in my view. That was in Israel then, and an increased rate of forceps. But the numbers are so small, I suppose they couldn't find any differences with respect to premature delivery, premature contractions, and gestational diabetes. Significantly increased risk also of preterm delivery, which I think is important. And birth weight under 2,500 grams. And that's systematic in all these studies. Simchen, also in Israel, looked at women after the age of 50, comparing them to women who were between the age of 45 and 49. Obviously, all the women after 50 were the products of egg donation. There was quite a few nullips in the older group compared to the younger group. Rate of SGA was significantly higher in the older group, small for gestational age, and the rate of cesarean rate was 100% in that group. And hospitalization rate for medical complications was 63% in the older group compared to 22% in the younger group, younger between 45 and 49. Salihu looks simply at the birth records and the statistics from the National Center for Health Statistics in the US. Believe it, I'm sorry, this slide is very crowded. I hope you can see well. There was 539 births above the age of 50 between 97 and 98. Because 37% of them were multiple, one can imagine it was mostly because of the use of artificial reproductive technologies. And they found out that all of these conditions were increased incrementally from each decade, from the decades of 20s, 30s, 40s to 50s. There was an increased incidence of cardiac diseases, diabetes, preeclampsia, eclampsia, abruption, and placenta previa. As well, increase in low birth weight infants, very low birth weight preterm, very preterm, and the fetal mortality also was increased with an odds ratio of 2.2. And if you look at the multiples, I think the numbers are too small because you didn't have that many patients, but similar increase as well. So I think in conclusion, we can conclude that there is an increased risk of pregnancy after menopause, after 50, both maternal and neonatal. Increased risk of cesarean. Is cesarean a big deal? In 2009, one could argue that it's not a huge deal. However, it is increased. Hypertensive complications are definitely increased. Gestational diabetes is increased. On the neonatal side, you have an increased risk of fetal death of small for gestational age infants and an incidence of higher incidence of preterm delivery. So I think in conclusion, also, we must use caution in analyzing the previously published data, which is very scarce again, because these studies are very often retrospective and very often looked at spontaneous pregnancies as opposed to pregnancies which are willing, women who willingly go through pregnancy with an egg donor. I think it's most important to screen for pre-existing condition. I myself delivered at least a dozen of women above the age of 50. I'll never forget this. Dr. Grunbaum will remember this incident when I was called one morning about a patient who ruptured her membranes, and her C-section was booked 2 days later. And so, oh, by the way, this is a 6 C-section, and by the way, she's also 60 years old. I'm like, excuse me? She's 60 years old. She was 60, and when I took my resident to do the 6th C-section, what happened is that it was all with the same husband. She had 3 kids with the husband, and when her kids started having kids, they decided to have another go at it with the same husband. So she had 3 kids after the age of 55, and that was her 6th. And we took her for a C-section. Went to the rectus muscle because I love to do a malar incision when I anticipate a lot of adhesions, and the resident proceeded into going straight into the bladder. It was a really nice incision, repaired very neatly by the urologists. And when I asked the patients, "Do you think you're done yet?" she answered me, "I'm not quite sure." So it was quite amusing. I still see her 3 years later for her twice yearly GYN exams and order her bone scans and mammograms. And thank God she's not pregnant. Anyway, there might be a role, I think, to minimize the risk, to limit the number of fetuses. And now that ART is more advanced in terms of success with single embryo transfer, I think that would be the wisest thing to do if you have a woman who's really keen on having a pregnancy after 50 to do a single embryo transfer. Inform the patient about the unknown medical risks, the sociological consequences. You know, she might have breast cancer in 2 years and die. Who's going to raise a child? And ideally, I think, and that's lacking, we should have an international registry of patients who have pregnancy after 50, so we can collect data and look at what are the risk factors, what are the things that can cause bad outcomes, what are the good outcomes, and what is the ideal setting for pregnancy after 50, because whether you want it or not, is going to happen, and women are going to request it. And we have quite a few of them at Cornell. Thank you very much.